Hi, everyone. My name is Rabia Akonde. I'm just delighted to introduce the facilitator of this program today. I am co-chair of the African Interest Group at the American Society of International Law. I'll just go ahead and get started because we have a really delightful set of presentations that is hosted by no less a person than Professor Obiora Okafor. Professor Okafor is the Edward B. Berlin Chair in International Law at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies in the United States of America. So this could really go on for a long time. I'm going to try to make it as brief as possible. Professor Okafor is also professor at Osgoode Hall Law School of York University in Toronto in Canada. And he has held there the York Research Chair, actually the inaugural York Research Chair in International and Transnational Legal Studies, the senior chair. And he also is the United Nations Independent Expert on Human Rights and International Solidarity, as well as a former chairperson of the UN Human Rights Council Advisory Committee. Professor Okafor is the general editor of the international journal, the Transnational Human Rights Review, and editorial board member of several other academic journals around the world. He has held the Ganifawemi Distinguished Chair in Human Rights Law at the Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, and has also served as visiting professor at several universities globally. He's been conferred with several awards. All you have to do is to Google Professor Okafor to get the really long list of all the awards that he has won, teaching awards, scholarly awards. And of course, he has published numerous volumes, numerous books, co-edited several books as well, and has authored more than 100 articles. I'm just going to go ahead and have Professor Okafor take the floor and coordinate the rest of the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, my colleague Rabiat, for the overly generous introduction. It's my pleasure as a long-standing member of the Africa Interest Group of the American Society of International Law to do very little today except to facilitate conversation led by excellent presenters. And the topic of today is one that after my heart, not because I love what goes on about it, but it's because something I've thought about and worked on for quite a bit, both in my academic capacity and in the work that I do advising the UN Human Rights Council. And so it's my pleasure really to be here to listen to the presentations and the conversation that would follow it. As you know, it's a very live issue, one that is connected to, of all things, coups, actually, of recent in Niger. And it's interesting to see or to hear what the takes of all the presenters. I think what I'll do is to introduce the presenters at the beginning, and then we'll just proceed in the order in which are listed in the flyer that I received, or the documentation that I received. So I think we have Amanda Bisong, I hope I'm pronouncing that well, who's with the Center for Africa-Europe Relations. I know you're located both in Maastricht, in the Netherlands, and Brussels, in Belgium. So I'm not sure where you are personally yourself, but I know your center has those two locations. I don't see Mr. Mlambo here. So I'll introduce Paula Pace of the IOM, the International Organization for Migration in Nigeria, my home country. So known as Nigeria. Welcome. And Fatma Rash, is that correct? You can correct me. I often have my name slaughtered by North Americans, so I'm very sensitive about pronouncing people's names right. Of the University of Jendouba in Tunisia. You're welcome as well. So without further ado, just to give you maximum time, which in these presentations ends up being 12 minutes with little flexibility for another 2 or 3 minutes so that we can ensure that we'll have a conversation at the end. So I would just go on to invite Amanda to lead off. 12 minutes, please, so that we can please try to keep to time because it's important to have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Okafor, and thank you, Rabiat, for inviting me to participate in this session. Yeah, I think I'll get right to it so we can have time for a lively conversation at the end of the inputs. I think my presentation will focus on the impact of the EU's externalization, border externalization policies in Africa, and I'll hint a little bit at the effectiveness of the EU response and conclude with some questions that I hope will trigger the discussions. In the meantime, please, during my presentation, if you have any questions to ask, please don't forget to put them in the Q&A function, and I look forward to engaging with the questions. So I'll just start on externalization and the fact that externalization of EU policies in Africa is a present reality and something that we're not seeing going away anytime soon. Recently, this month, in the State of the Union, State of the EU press statement released by President Ursula von der Leyen, she referred to the deal between the EU and Tunisia as one of as a template that could be used or would be used by the EU in future negotiations or future migration-related issues. Now, the EU-Tunisia deal has been a deal that has been widely criticized by NGOs, academics, civil society actors as paying Tunisia to keep sub-Saharan migrants in Tunisia, also paying Tunisia to act as a border guard for the EU. This is a deal that is worth about almost 900 million euros. And so at what cost to the EU taxpayer would these migration policies come? These are some questions that are being asked, but also on the Tunisian side, and on the African side, at what cost to the African migrants, at what cost to the governments in these countries would these migration deals cost? But just to make the point that the fact that the EU is pursuing its externalization agenda is very present, and it's not something that is going to go away anytime soon. Coming to the cooperation between the EU and African countries on migration issues, there's been a lot of cooperation. So from the AU-EU partnerships, so from the African Union, European Union partnerships, there's been a lot of cooperation there under the Migration and Mobility Dialogue. At the regional level, EU member states have also cooperated with regional bodies, for example, in West Africa, such as the Economic Community of West African States on migration issues. We've also seen cooperation at the bilateral level, so between EU member states and African member states. An example would be the Tunisia deal. Or also Niger, as Prof alluded to in his opening statement. We've seen those kinds of deals that have gone on in terms of cooperation on migration. But what has been the effect of some of these deals, or how this cooperation is being implemented? First of all, we see that between the AU, the African Union, and the European Union, one of the effects of the way migration cooperation is being conducted is that it creates alternative platforms for cooperation between different groupings of states, depending on the subject matter. So you have regional economic communities within Africa that are addressing issues of migration. You have the AU, the African Union, at the continental level that is pushing its free movement protocol, which is the free movement of persons on the continent. But in cooperation with the EU, you have different groupings that are now being formed based on the interests of the EU. So depending on the routes that are being used, countries are being selected to cooperate with the EU, depending on the routes that are being used predominantly by migrants, depending on the origin countries of some of these migrants. And so we see different groupings that are kind of at cross purposes with regional economic communities or with the interests of the African Union when it comes to the free movement protocol. What we see again in terms of this cooperation is the focus on the bilateral level, on the focus of bilateral cooperation at the expense of regional cooperation. So I give the example here of West Africa, where you have free movement of persons within the ECOWAS framework. And as a result of the implementation of EU externalization policies in Niger, we've done some research on this. It's been published. I could put the links also for you to see in the chat. We've seen that as a result of the externalization policies of the EU in Niger, it has led to a reduction in terms of the implementation of the ECOWAS free movement protocol, especially when it comes to ECOWAS citizens that have to transit through Niger or have to go to Niger for any purposes. They're all tagged as potential migrants, quote and unquote. And then we also see the strategic use of funding instruments and development assistance to pursue migration cooperation objectives, or in this case, what we would tag the containment focus of the EU when it comes to movement of persons on the continent. But this is not to say that African states don't have agency in these discussions. Of course, they do have agency. They have their own interests that they're trying to pursue. And from the research, what we've seen is one of the interests of African states is that they would want to promote legitimacy. So again, arguments about this, and I and some colleagues wrote on the coup in Niger and what this means for migration. I could also put the links in the chat for you to see. But we argue there that one of the issues about the government, that was removed in Niger is the fact that they were trying to promote legitimacy, external legitimacy with foreign partners without resolving the internal issues that were in the country. So one of the interests of African states is using migration cooperation to promote their legitimacy, or using migration cooperation with the EU to pursue other state interests, such as cooperation on security measures or their foreign policy interests, and also accessing funding for their own domestic measures. Again, if we look at the case of Niger, the direct budget support that was given in this case was quite a huge amount compared to the size and the absorption capacity of Niger. So these are some of the interests that we see on the part of African countries. What are the implications for regional migration governance here when we look at the focus of EU externalization policies? We see that parallel agendas exist. So and the parallel agenda, although the parallel agendas exist, the one that gets funding is the one that is of interest to the EU. So I mentioned that the African Union has its free movement protocol, which it has been trying to get states to ratify. And then on the other hand, you have EU externalization policies on the continent that are focusing on the containment of people or keeping people within certain confined spaces, or expecting people to move within certain spaces only. And of course, the ones that would get funding, the ones that would get attention by the states are the ones that get, the ones that get the attention of the states and get implemented are the ones that get funding by donors. Also, we see that it disrupts the free movement agenda, especially within REX. There's a case of ECOWAS for this, and also results in some domestic conflicts. So looking at different groupings within states that have been involved in conflict as a result of some of these migration externalization policies implemented in Africa. Now, I see my time is going, so I'm going to jump and go to my recommendations. So there's a lot to be said about the way the current policies are being implemented. The fact that they are non-formal, the fact that they're not subject to parliamentary scrutiny, either by the EU Parliament or by national parliaments of African countries. And so in order to try to pursue transparency, I think it's imperative that we bring back parliamentary scrutiny into some of these deals, ensure that they are not conducted in the current way, which is a non-formal way, and really look towards having really mutually beneficial partnerships. So not just focusing on containment or focusing on acting as the border guard for the EU, but also what aspects of this migration cooperation would be beneficial to African countries? Are we talking about creating pathways for labor migration? Are we talking about promoting student mobility? What other pathways would be, or how would this migration cooperation be more beneficial? I think it's important to look at these issues. Also looking at addressing issues around structural inequality, because if we look closely at the drivers of migration, we see that structural inequality lies at the root of this. So this is beyond the scope of migration policies, but also looking at some of the economic policies that really fuel this structural inequality and seeing how they can be addressed. The focus on returns and reintegration is something that we need to rethink, because as we've seen in research, there is a huge focus on returns and reintegration, but sometimes people are returned only to re-migrate again, or returned into a more difficult level of precarity than they were in prior to migration. Regarding the AU, I said I was going to hint at the responses of the AU. We've seen that these externalization policies contradict clearly the AU's free movement protocol and the agenda that it's trying to pursue with the movement of people on the continent. But the AU needs to be more vocal in stating these contradictory effects. We also see that the AU has not really been vocal when it comes to the effects, like the Tunisia deal, or the effects of some of these EU externalization policies on the continent. The only time we've really seen the AU put out a strong statement was when there was a possibility of offshoring asylum processing to third countries, and that was when the AU really put out a strong statement. But other than that, we really haven't seen that strong united front from the AU. Also, not only looking at the EU externalization policies and its effects in Africa, but the AU needs to equally respond to mistreatment of migrants on the continent, whether it be in Tunisia, whether it be in Malawi, or in other countries on the continent. The AU needs to take a more vocal stance and more united front in responding to policies and practices that do not respect the rights of migrants. Yeah, thank you. And I think this way I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you for stopping right on time. I really appreciate that as being in the chair. And in terms of formation of customary international law, I hope there's instant custom and other speakers will obey this custom that you've just formed, Amanda. I now move on to Victor Lambo, who I see has joined us. Victor is at the School of Public Management, Governance, and my document doesn't say what the other public is. Probably public administration.
Public policy.
Public policy, excellent. At the University of Johannesburg.
Johannesburg, yes.
In my favorite country, South Africa. After only Nigeria, of course.
You are from my country. I want to visit so much.
Thank you, Victor. You will have 12 minutes with flexibility for another two or 3 minutes.
No, I'll try to keep it. I'll try
obey
to keep
the custom that has just emerged.
Amanda was wrong. She was supposed to take another 40 minutes. But thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you very much, Rabiat, for inviting me here. I really appreciate it, and I hope I said that right. We are talking about a very, very complex, a very, very deep topic today. There's one thing I prefer whenever I invite to speak on migration in Africa, be it security, be it externalization. I always say that it is impossible to stop the human movement of people. You can erect as much fences as you want, as much borders as you want, but it is impossible to stop the movement of people. That being said, I want to go back a bit and say, why so much border securitization? Why so much externalization? Why is the border today so militarized? And then I say, let's go back to 9/11. Let's go back to 9/11 and let's go back and look at migration pre-9/11. Let's go to look how many sub-Saharan Africans were migrating illegally to the EU post 9/11. And then let's go pre-9/11, and now let's go post 9/11. And I argue with you, migration as a process became militarized and securitized after 9/11, where the migrant was now seen as someone who is dangerous. Now, this has led to a lot of the othering, racism, discrimination based on where one comes from, not where one works or what one can contribute. I think, Prof, if I just make a slight example with you, I think maybe in the US, you've had these incidences and you're a professor, but they don't care whether you're a professor. But maybe because you come from Nigeria, you are based on you're Nigerian. Why aren't you in Nigeria? But when we come back to the whole process around EU externalization, we ask ourselves, what happened? Why so many people are seeing EU as a final destination? Before I go there, we need to debunk the notion we see in the media that says many Africans are going to the EU. Contrary to popular demand, many Africans actually migrate within the African continent. As of 2021, a report I just found, it was more than 19 million traveled within the African continent, seeking greener pastures, seeking refugee, asylum, safety, you name it. So we need to debunk that notion. But the whole concept around EU externalization, the mass movement of people to the EU began, if you read the trends research, began with the destabilization of Libya in 2011. When Libya was destabilized, it contributed greatly to the proliferation of small weapons in the Sahel. It destabilized in the Sahel. If you read a lot of articles, they will coincide and tell you Boko Haram first gained traction with the destabilization of Libya because the movement of weapons from the region infiltrated the whole of the Sahel. Once that done, it gave rise to, I wouldn't want to call Islamization, but it gave rise to destabilization, it gave rise to jihadism, it gave rise to different types of insurgency. What did itself? When people were now fearing for their safety, they had to migrate. And when they migrated, as much as they migrated in Africa, some saw EU or Europe, perhaps, as a more desirable destination because Libya was now destabilized. We could now cross to Libya and go to the EU. But what this has done in retrospect, it has changed how Europeans view migration. At the beginning, few Africans arriving wasn't a problem. Yeah, it's fine, we can take care of you. Yeah, we'll house you in the shelter in Sierra, France. Yeah, we'll go to Sicily, Italy. But now the large number of arriving migrants in the EU has given rise to populism and Euroscepticism. Today, visa-grade countries don't even talk about migrants. They don't want to hear anything about migrants if you go to the visa-grade countries. Angela Merkel said, no, the EU must be welcoming. We're going to admit so many migrants from Africa. Yes, she did that, but when it got overwhelming, people said, no. Alternative parties for development came up. Euroscepticism, populism started rising considerably in the EU. Now, coming back to Africa, and my leader, Amanda, spoke greatly and said, I want to go back on the AU. People ask, why can't the AU stop migration, illegal or undocumented migration to the EU? I said to people, the problem with African countries is they are scared of supranationalism. African countries are scared of one continental body having more power over the nationalist sentiments. In Southern Africa today, I can tell you, we've been speaking of a free movement protocol since I think 1994, 1998. But still, even today, we don't have a free movement protocol. For some countries in the region are not in agreement. They see that as a way of opening floodgates for migrants to come into their countries. Coming back to Africa, that is the problem with the AU. It's there as a continental body. But the problem is many countries do not want to be ruled or are scared of this supernatural institution that has the power or will be given the power to override their national laws. Many African leaders are more concerned about what happens nationally than what happens continentally. With regards to migration, the EU understands the problems of migration. I assume they care about the thousands and thousands and thousands of migrants who are dying in the Mediterranean Sea, trying to reach Europe. That is why they have these programs with as my leader said, Amanda, with Tunisia, they had some with Libya, Niger is there, Mali, Burkina Faso. But the problem is with externalization policies is that who ensures they adhere to human rights? I can give you money and say reinforce your border. I can give you money and say build detention centers, house migrants, and repatriate them back to their countries. That is fine. If we agree bilaterally as countries, that is fine. But the problem is who ensures when those migrants are detained, their human rights are respected. If you go, there are many documentaries on YouTube by DW, by Vice News that documented migrants being sold to farmers in Libya, women migrants being sold to prostitution in Libya. Men were sold to work in farms. So there was a market to buying and selling migrants. Now, this is a direct result of EU externalization policies. Giving money alone is not enough. It's fine if you agree. Giving money alone is not enough. But to what extent can you ensure that migrants whom have been detained in Libya, in Tunisia, in Algeria, in Niger, have their dignity and human rights intact? That is the fundamental question around the whole externalization policies, because cooperation is good in the international stage. It's good to cooperate and have bilateral agreements to protect your own sovereignty. But migration is closely related to the concept of international human rights. So we need to ensure, yes, migrants don't have the papers to come in illegally, so we determine them as the undesirable migrants. But they also have right to international law, and these need to be respected. Now, this cooperation, in the past, many African countries have refused to take back migrants from the EU. They said, if they don't want to come back, we don't want to take them. As a result, the EU has responded to say, it's okay, we'll cut down on financial aid and we'll increase our visa blockade to people from countries who do not want to take back migrants. Now, what is the solution to this? I said at the beginning, you cannot stop the movement of people. Trump tried it in the US-Mexico border. These Mexican drug cartels build tunnels underground to ship their stuff. Migrants build tunnels underground to go into the US. The problem with externalization policies, they're addressing the symptom, not the cause or the root cause. The root cause of migration in Africa is related to governance and underdevelopment and poverty and failure of the post-colonial leader to unite and build a cohesive nation state. Today, the post-colonial nation state is suffering from a crisis because when we gained independence, and these are the words of Mahmoud Mamdani, say, when we gained independence, we focused so much on dismantling whiteness. We focused so much on deracialization through Africanization and implementing nationalist policies. But we did not focus on the element of decolonization. And when the African leader gained power, they focused greatly on immersing wealth and did not take the importance of decolonization as an important factor in the post-colonial African state. Now, if you look at the Sahel, right now, everything in the Sahel is slowly but surely becoming destabilized. Everything in the Sahel. You have the juntas who've taken power in Mali, Burkina Faso. In Gabon, you have the juntas there. So the whole security situation around the Sahel is becoming slowly but surely deteriorating. The French have pulled out. I read an article yesterday saying migrant trafficking or smuggling is now booming in Niger. Remember, there's a town in Niger, I forgot the name. Many people who survived there depended on trafficking, on smuggling migrants to the EU. Now, when the EU implemented externalization policies, it did not think about what are we going to do about those people who survived on smuggling people to the EU. Not to say it was their responsibility to take care of them, but now the junta is taken over and is focused on consolidating power and getting rid of French influence. It's highly likely that the increase now in migration through Libya, through Niger, is going to increase again. Now, I see the time. Okay, now, if we look at the question is, who should be held accountable? Who should this money, the EU is, and it's billions and billions of euros, but we still see people arriving. At the center of migration is good governance. At the center of addressing undocumented migration is growth, economic growth, and is the respect for constitutionalism and human rights. As long as we don't have that in this continent, I guarantee you, colleagues, we can even say we are going to put, I don't know, 1 trillion euros to Africa. People will still make it to the EU. And secondly, many African governments, to be honest, in sub-Saharan Africa, don't have an interest in stopping migration. There was a leader, I won't say his name, who was speaking in a rally in West Africa, and they asked him about undocumented migration. He said, when they leave my shores, they are not my problem, they are Europeans' problem. So many African leaders in West Africa are not that interested in addressing migration. They only do it when they are coerced or forced through threats such as cut in financial aid or cut in visa processing for those countries. Then they stand up and react and say, hey, okay, we're going to do it. Okay, we're going to do it. But in real aspects, they're not interested in stopping migration because they understand the underdevelopmental issues that continue to plague the African nation. Nevertheless, it is paramount that to some extent they do take interest, considering the number of deaths that are taking place in the Mediterranean. We cannot sit back and fold our arms. Many people, many young people, women, children are dying in the Mediterranean just because I say, once they leave the shores, they're not my problem anymore. So what is the solution to this problem? I've said this before. If you want to address undocumented migration, it's not about externalization, pouring money into countries. Or if you want to pour that money, pour money into developing those countries which you feel are contributing towards undocumented migration in the EU. Pour money into strengthening governing institutions. Pour money into ensuring those countries respect human rights, the rule of law, and good governance and constitutionalism. That is the first departing step to addressing undocumented migration. But we can pour money to Tunisia, Algeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, you name it. It's not going to stop because as we pour more money, smugglers are getting more clever because it is lucrative. A BBC documentary showed it costs about $2,300 or $2,500 US for one migrant to be shipped from Libya to Italy. So it's too lucrative to let go. As you employ these externalization policies, smugglers are also sitting down and exploring new ways to make use or find loopholes in this fence you are trying to erect, because if they erect this fence, you are going to stop their lucrative bid. Let me stop there. I want to keep to time. I'm just checking my watch as I speak, so I'm going to stop there and keep to time. I'm following Amanda's footsteps. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is excellent. We hope the trend continues. And I'll call on Paola Pes, I'm not sure which one, to present our thoughts.
Thank you very much, Professor Okafor. Greetings from Abuja, capital of Nigeria, so where I moved not too long ago. I'm 1 month old here. So I'm very happy to be with you today. My surname is actually Pace, that means peace in my mother tongue.
Nice, nice.
All right, so I'll try to...
Thanks for explaining that, yeah.
No problem, no problem. I will try to share a few slides. Let's see if it works. Can you see?
Yes.
Can you see the slide?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So what I wanted, just to complement what the colleagues have already said pretty well, I think what we need to really acknowledge, and I would like to thank you actually a few friends and colleagues, Christy Severance, an immigration lawyer, Sandy Smith, a colleague from IOM, and Federico Sarchiapone for the research that is the base of the few slides I will show you. What I think is very important to stress and continue to highlight is that migration is rare. If we talk about international migration, if we talk about international migration and internal migration, then 1 on 7 people lives outside his habitual place of residence. But if we look at only international migration, yes, is on the rise, but is still a rare phenomenon. It's only 3.6% of the overall population that lives outside its country of origin. Europe, in line with the latest report from UNDESA, is the continent that hosts the majority of migrants, but they represent only 12% of the overall population in Europe. And these migrants come mostly from European countries, followed by Asian countries, and all other countries from North America, Oceania, different continents. And only 13% of the migrant stock in Europe come from Africa. So Africans in Europe are very rare. And we know very well that the presence of diaspora represents a pull factor for people to choose a destination compared to another one, because they know they will have links to find jobs, or to better their economic opportunities, to find someone who can navigate them through the systems in the new country. So migration in Africa, if we look at Africa, migration in Africa is mainly intracontinental, like in Europe. And if we look specifically at West, Center, Southern Africa, East and Horn, so what is commonly known as Sub-Saharan Africa, although it's a term I don't favor, considering that I've been in this continent for more than a decade, and I know how different every single place is. So lump sum everything in one concept is superficial. So in 2020, Sub-Saharan Africa, though, if we want to call it like that, so East, Center, Southern, East and Horn, had the second largest share of intra-regional migration globally. So 63% of those coming from these 3 sub-regions in the continent stayed within their sub-regions, mostly in neighboring countries or within that part of the continent. This is regular migration. Irregular migration, this statement is a bit provocative, but can be found, this projection can be found in an IOM publication. So irregular migration represents between 10 and 15% of the migration flows globally. So few are those migrants who migrate irregularly. Even if we look at irregular migration, it's mostly about overstaying. It's not about irregular movements. But that's not what we hear, what we read, what we listen, in particular if we follow the media. Between 2017 and 2023, more or less 900,000 migrants arrived irregularly in Italy, Spain, Greece, Malta, and Cyprus by sea and land. So this is the number of people who arrived in Europe. As you see, this number is not very high. And the total number of arrivals in Europe decreased from 2017 to 2023. And the main destination vary from year to year. This year is mostly Italy, because the departure is mostly Tunisia, considering that since November 2022, Black migrants have faced a number of abuses and violence, extreme violence that pushed them to leave. The majority of those living irregularly from Tunisia have always been Tunisians, up to 98% certain years. Other nationalities, some years, the second nationality was Moroccans. But from November 2022, the things shift because of the violence against Black migrants. Then you had Ivorians, Guineans living irregularly from Tunisia before Tunisians did. So in fact, an anti-migration agenda results in more departure and more deaths. So while if we look at irregular movement from and within the continent, the biggest numbers go from Ethiopia mostly, through Djibouti, through Yemen, and destination countries are Israel and Saudi Arabia. So the majority of migrants who live from Africa to the rest of the world don't go to Europe. They go mostly east. But although this eastern route is more prominent in terms of number, the deadliest route, the busiest maritime and deadliest maritime route is through the Mediterranean Sea. African represents 67% of the 1,330 victims identified in 2022. 45% would be from East, Central, Southern, East, and North of Africa, while the rest come from North Africa. And as we said, Africans, North Africans, and Sub-Saharan Africans, if we want to say like that, represent 63% of the death and the missing. The rest are from the Middle East. So just to remind us of the facts, because migration is a natural phenomenon that has always existed and will always exist, and is very beneficial if well governed, but there are a lot of stereotypes related to migration. So we really need, and I am surrounded, I'm well surrounded by academicians, so we really need academia to really focus not on irregular migration, but on the benefit of migration and the benefit of facilitating such regular migration. And it's also important for the academia to also focus on the cost of exclusion. Migration and development was really at the heart of the creation of IOM in 1951 by 16 member states from Europe, but also the Americans, as well as countries like Turkey, and so on and so forth. So the reasons why this organization was created in the same year as UNHCR was to facilitate the emigration from Europe. There was a coming out of the war that had high displacement within the continent, high unemployment, and where conflict between for scarce resources were on the rise. The organization was supposed to facilitate such migration. A few years later, compared to 1951, we had also the European Union and at the same time ECOWAS implementing the ambition, like expressing their ambition to facilitate freedom of movement. So we see that in the Maastricht Treaty as well as we see that in the ECOWAS Treaty. We also see that, as other speakers said before me, we see that also in the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, where the idea of facilitating the obtainment of visas upon arrival, the elimination of visas for African and African passport, a bit like the common passport for the ECOWAS, are brought forward. But we also know that the protocol for the freedom of movement of person has been ratified only by 3 states, and it requires 15 states in order to enter into force. So as our brother from South Africa was saying, there's this still security approach towards migration in Africa as much as in Europe, and this diffidence from the other, the one that comes from our neighboring countries. I've worked in migration for over 2 decades, half of my time working mostly on Europe and half of my time working in Africa. So I've seen also deportation of certain nationals from some country in the continent, which obviously is completely contrary to international law as much as our collective expulsions. So the reality is that yes, there are obstacles to really implement the idea of freedom of movement and the facilitation of such movement. But these obstacles, they come also from a securitarian approach from the European Union and from the focus that European Union, but also African countries have placed on irregular migration, instead of realizing that the only way to really prevent irregular migration, the only way to counter crimes such as smuggling and trafficking is providing concrete alternative within country of origin as well, but also abroad, within the continent, within the region, and across continents. So realigning of regular pathways from the continent globally as a concrete alternative to regular migration is the only way forward. Experts have noted that states cannot expect different results from the same action, referring to years of containment policies, building walls, stopping people. And we saw that people have not stopped, and actually more deaths have occurred. While states have everything in Africa, within Africa, outside Africa, in Europe, within Europe, have everything to gain from facilitating migration. They can regulate migration in this way, boost their economy, improve security, profit from the long-term benefits, migrants and migration bring. It's really a business model, if you like, because realizing the vision that all stakeholders have reaped the full benefit of migration really indicate the evidence around it indicates that the benefits are enormous. States could save money, gain political capital, reduce irregular migration by offering efficient regular means for entry and stay. They could protect their own interests as well as the rights of migrants. So we have all to gain. And this is also well stated in the Global Compact for Migration that has a specific objective 11 on the facilitation of migration, and member states have written in the text 62 times that they do commit to facilitate migration. So if this is done properly, that's when you curb smuggling and trafficking, that's when you protect human rights of migrants, that's when you reduce criminality. Of course, the long-term goal includes also going at the root causes of irregular migration that are conflict, violence, poverty, poor governance, until these root causes can be eliminated. Regular pathways are of different types, skill mobility partnerships, so labor facilitation or labor migration, not only of the high skilled, but all kinds of skills within the continent, the two continents and among the continents, but also family unification, also protection-related pathways, not only resettlement, but also private sponsorship, other pathways that benefits not only refugees, but other migrants with protection needs. So favoring such pathways enhance safety and security for migrants, but also for the state. For example, if you make a person migrate regularly, at a certain point the person will be returned, you have already identified. So that facilitates also the return of a person. So we have really also from a security approach, we have everything to gain. Also from an economic approach, from a human rights approach. So it does make sense for everybody. And I would like to conclude with an individual case scenario of one specific pathways. So I'm gonna play a video and then we'll talk briefly to conclude about this individual case scenario. If Professor Okafor allows me, apart if I'm too long, in that case I can stop here.
You have about 2 minutes, but we can add another minute, 3 minutes.
Okay, but I think I can make it in 2. Please just let me know if you can hear the video. So that's a real story of a family unification case.
Can't hear the audio. I can't.
You can't hear?
No, I can't hear the audio. I don't know if anyone else can. Yeah, just the audio. Yeah.
Okay, but then we can also watch simply. That's just a that's just some music.
Okay.
So we can just watch the images and then I'll tell you in 1 minute this human interest story, if you allow me.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the story I wanted to tell you about is a story of resilience, like it's often the case when one deals directly with direct assistance of migrants and protection, is the story of a young woman who, from an early age, had had the chance to meet the love of her life. This companion had to leave the country of origin because of prosecution, had to flee all of a sudden, and she was left behind. Year passes, they still keep in contact. At a certain point, her father decides to sell her to an older man for a forced marriage. She escapes to the neighboring country where her sister is living. Her father finds her. She goes forward. She arrives in Tunisia. I'm contacted by Caritas in IOM Tunisia. So I managed to find this young woman, and it starts the process of family reunification. It became a very difficult case to deal with because they were not married. She would have never received a visa in order to go to Europe in order to reunite with her companion, considering that there was no marriage. They managed after a long time to marry by proxy. We followed their case, we assisted them legally. Then, we had to translate the documents. It's a very long story, but to cut a very long story short, after 2.5 years, she managed to reunite with her husband. But this story shows us how migration pathways really don't work in practice. She should have been able to reunite with a partner from the country of origin without having to endure forced marriage and without having to endure the abuses she faced in the world of work in the countries along the way. So that's to say, and it's also, if she hadn't met an international organization and she wasn't really accompanied during the process of family reunification in order to exercise the right to family unit, she would never manage to go across, in that case, to Europe. I've dealt with thousands of these cases, from East Africa to North Africa to other places, to Oceania and so on. I've been supporting a number of migrants to find a solution for any individual case, but it should be possible for states to put in practice procedure that work for highly qualified migrants, for other skills they need for the labor market, in order to avoid that people pay criminal networks, while at the moment, the real facilitator of migration in regular fashion, of course. We saw it's rare, it still happens, and the consequences are dreadful. So I think we have lots to do together, and we really, for me, it's a call to academia to focus more on the benefit of regular migration and on the benefit of migration per se, and also the cost of exclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paola. Pache, I hope I got that this time. It's now time to invite Fatima Ra. You have to tell me how to pronounce it, the name correctly. Is it Rak or Rash?
Hi, Doctor. In Arabic, it's Rash.
Rash, okay. Excellent.
Yes, but in French we can, spell it as you want. Rash.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So in my presentation, I will, in fact, demonstrate how the management of the border and the externalization impacted the Tunisian policy in matter of migration, and also it is impacting African Union law and the relationship between African countries. First of all, in order to analyze the European Union policy in matter of border management and migration, we have to focus on one thing. In fact, in order to implement its policy, the externalization policy, European Union use tools which are the same for all the third countries. For example, when we compare Tunisia, Turkey, Serbia, Niger, we find that the European Union uses the same model, the same recipe in order to make third country cooperate in matter of border management and migration. So it's a kind of a prêt-à-porter model, which cannot take, which don't take into consideration the legal framework of the country and also its regional obligation. So when we will analyze the instruments used to implement the European Union externalization policy in Tunisia, we can separate them into three subcategories. We have political instrument, legal instrument, and financial instrument. For the political instrument, we have the privileged partnership plan of action, which cover the period 2013-2017, the joint declaration for the mobility partnership in 2014. For the legal instrument, we have many agreements, bilateral instruments with Italy, France, Switzerland, Germany, Belgium, which cover some aspect about, there are some provisions on readmission, security cooperation, visa facilitation. And we have, for the financial instrument, we have two main categories. We have the European Neighborhood Instrument and the European Union Trust Fund for Africa. So when we analyze the project covered by this financial instrument, we will find that the main area of cooperation are related to the securitarian aspect. It's related to the capacity building of the guard, the coast, of the police, and so 80% of the budget is reserved to the border management, and only 20% of the budget is goes to the situation of the migrants and the reinforcement of the rights of the migrants. So the overreaching aim of the European Union in cooperating with Tunisia has been the containment of migrants and refugees in Tunisia. So the objective is not to facilitate or to reinforce regular migration, other pathways, but to contain migrants in Tunisia. In fact, the policy, the European Union policy in Tunisia is, when we analyze what's happening now, we can consider that it's changing. Till 2022-21, it was the same policy. The European Union is trying to convince Tunisia to be a third country, a third state country, by adopting the national law on asylum, because unfortunately in Tunisia we haven't a national asylum law, and it's the most significant factor undermining protection of vulnerable population in Tunisia. So one of the elements of this European Union policy was to finance the preparation of a national law. The national law is ready, but it wasn't adopted by the parliament. In fact, the Tunisian authority was afraid by the instrumentalization of the European Union, because they are afraid if Tunisia will adopt the national asylum law, European Union will consider Tunisia as a safe third country, and they will also readmit the Tunisian national who are in in Europe, and also we know that European Union is trying to make Tunisia accept to readmit also the non-national. So it was a kind of Tunisia was didn't adopt the same strategy as Serbia, as Turkey, as Niger. Tunisia refused to be a platform of embarkation, to outsource the migration and the asylum also procedure in Tunisia by not adopting the national asylum law. It was, in fact, the political situation also was an important factor, because during this period, during the period of the preparation of the national asylum law financed by the European Union, in Tunisia, the civil society was very active and refused to be a kind of agent to execute the European Union policy. Actually, the situation is changing, unfortunately, in Tunisia, because with the hate speech in February, the violence against migrants increased, and we are discussing now about what will happen after the MOU. In the MOU, Tunisia is still refusing to be the platform of disembarkation, but in the same time, we don't speak about the reinforcement of the migrant rights, about the asylum seekers' right. When we it's a kind of analysis of the current situation, but when we analyze the instrument existing till 2014 till now, the main characteristic is that the European Union policy aims to make Tunisia a country of containment, like what is happening in Turkey, in Niger, in other people. And the main also characteristic of those agreements and cooperation relationship is the lack of transparency. The most important legal instruments regarding readmission are not public. The civil society is playing a big role, because it is here to criticize what's happening, but also there is no accountability mechanism in field of asylum and immigration detention. So European Union is financing the border management, the border control, using the most important amount of for the migration management to reinforce the securitarian aspect of migration. And as we know, it is inefficient. It is inefficient and counterproductive policy, because it doesn't reduce the number of migrants arriving to Europe, because as you know, human beings want to be free to beneficiate from the liberty of movement. And what is the other impact, the most important impact of the European Union policy on Tunisia and the managing the border and managing also the migration in Tunisia? It is this manner to influence the coherence of the coherence of the legal framework in Tunisia. As we know, Tunisia is an African country. We have free movement agreement with many African countries, and we have visa-free, for example, with Côte d'Ivoire, with many African countries. So unfortunately, today I heard that Tunisia and Côte d'Ivoire, they will impose visa, and it is because of the important number of people who are coming to Tunisia in order to cross the sea and to make Tunisia as a transit town in their migratory route. So as we know, as we can see, the European Union policy is impacting the national policies in matter of migration, but also it's impacting the bilateral and multilateral relationship between Tunisia and the other African countries, and it's harmful for the free of movement in the continent. So if the African Union is trying to reinforce the liberty of movement, the freedom of movement in the continent, we consider that the European Union policy is harmful for this objective and can make it very difficult. So to conclude, the key finding that we can present here is that the practices and procedure regarding immigration and asylum in the European Union Tunisia instrument are not compatible with the European Union and international law. So the most important objective of the European Union is to contain people, to contain migrants, and not to take care about the compatibility of these instruments with their human rights. The instruments are mixed, so it's about the capacity of officials and civil society strengthened while asylum legislation has been hindered, and nearly all activities still fully dependent on European Union funding. The policies in place are policies of exclusion, which add pressure on Tunisia to host refugees, and we can consider that this pressure is now a reality because the practice of the public policy of the public authority in Tunisia is changing still last February, and it's a kind of alignment with European Union objective. So to conclude, we can consider that the European Union's security-focused politics have been counterproductive because they have not reduced the number of people crossing the Mediterranean Sea. They have reinforced authorities' fear of having to play policeman for the European Union external borders. The Tunisian government is concerned about the European Union pressure will increase even more. So the situation is extremely critic, and unfortunately, even the consolidation of the African Union policy about the freedom of movement, it's impacted by the European Union externalization policy in Tunisia and in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatima Bashe. Hopefully I got it right this time. We have time, thankfully, for a conversation. We just have just under 20 minutes. So I hope we can get a few questions in from the audience. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat. Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of questions myself, and perhaps just been suggested, and I agree that we can also see if panelists have questions for each other, or just want to have quick comments, 1-minute comments on each other's presentation while we wait for questions from the audience. Yeah, do panelists have any comments or questions for each other?
If I could go first, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Yeah, I would just like to raise the point on the securitization, like we've seen, building on what Fatima was saying, and also use the case in point in Niger. So we see that from Niger, we saw that most of the funding for migration was going towards border measures, while of course there was some funding going towards development related projects in communities. But we saw that this was not to be compared with the amount and the focus on securitization of migration. And so what we're seeing also in Niger is a play out of the focus on securitization versus the focus on strengthening democratic structures and governance-related structures in the country. And so that's why the situation evolved the way it did. But not to say that with the current regime, it's going to be a free-for-all for smugglers within the country, because we see comments coming out of the current government saying that they are also going to take a hard stance against smuggling of migrants and against trafficking in persons. So the idea is to see how it plays out eventually. I think given the tracking that is being done currently, there hasn't been a surge yet in the number of people leaving from Niger, especially after the borders were opened. So it would be also good to put that in perspective. Regarding the issue of human rights, when we come to talk about externalization, I think that we also need to put this in focus, because at the end of the day, externalizing certain policies, externalizing certain practices, and the effect of human rights, the effect on the protection of the human rights of migrants leads to a shifting of responsibility. And so the question would be, who is responsible for the human rights infringements that occur in Libya or in Tunisia or in Niger or in other countries on the continent where there are visible evidence. There is visible evidence of infringement of human rights. Who is responsible for these actions? And I think we really need to bring back the rights of migrants, the human rights of migrants, into the discussions, because this is something that keeps falling by the side, but it's an important thing that needs to be recentered in the discussions around migration. I think I will stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment from a panelist on other panelists' presentation? Not necessarily an extension of your own presentation. Yes,
yes, Prof. Yes. It's not really a question. I think we spoke about more or less similar issues. I just want to understand from, I think, Fatma, am I saying it right? Fatma, right? Fatma, what is the perception in Tunisian society about this deal with the EU? Are Tunisians happy that they're getting this deal? Like I understand the politicians. I just want to come back to the ordinary Tunisians. Are they happy that this deal is taking place, or are maybe they're against playing host to a country that's, I wouldn't say containing migrants, but I'd say sliding towards the element of containment? What's the public sentiment like in Tunisian society?
I can respond now if you want.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. In fact, first of all, Tunisian society haven't any. I'm speaking about the ordinary people. The most important number of Tunisian society haven't any idea about the content of the deal, about the content of the MOU. So they haven't any idea about what's happening, what is changing, and there is also another element that we have to take into consideration. That is before the speech, the hate speech of February, some disinformation and populist campaign and hate campaign was engaged in the social media. So there is many many, in fact, manipulation. It's a kind of disinformation of the populations, the Tunisian people. But many people also, they are refusing because people are confused. They haven't, they don't analyze and understand exactly what is the obligation of Tunisia or the role of Tunisia under the MOU, because they haven't any idea about what is the content of the MOU. But there is one thing: people are refusing to play the role of the guard post of the European Union, and in the same time, people are the most important number. I'm not speaking about specialists or legal specialists or activists, but the most important number, they are refusing that Tunisia be a host country and a country of disembarkation. But I think that it's very difficult to conciliate the two elements, because it's okay. We are refusing to be just an executant of the European Union policy, but in the same times we have obligation under international law. We have to adopt a national law on asylum, and we have to assume our obligation in matter of protection of the refugee and the migrant rights. So there is a dilemma, actually, and unfortunately, the populist discourse is very harmful, actually, and it's not the same the Tunisian who were very who host the thousands of migrants coming from Libya in 2011, and who continued to host also migrants, and now I think that the public discourse and the policy makers and the policy discourse impacted the Tunisian and impacted the behavior in the Tunisian society. Thank you
for that. Thank you.
All right. Any other cutting comments from panelists? Yeah, feel free. In the absence, I could ask something. A couple of things, actually. One to Victor and one to Amanda. Victor, you made a point about securitization and militarization post 9/11. Certainly, you're correct that 9/11 did significantly exacerbate those two things: militarization, securitization, border control, and all that. But some may argue that, in fact, that has been a long-standing sort of phenomenon, right? And even in the U.S., if you look at the changes that were made to U.S. law post the first World Trade Center bombing in 1995-96, you see a huge spike. In fact, a lot of the changes for the worse that were made to refugee rights and the border happened then. And what you saw post 9/11 was a lot of repetition, actually, of what had been done already by IRERA and one other, I forget the exact other statute, right? So how do you situate 9/11's admittedly very important impact against this kind of historical trajectory of worsening, shall we say, worsening, at least undulating sort of border, not necessarily externalization, but certainly securitization.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Prof. Going back to the old Trade Center bombing, you see that the fundamental difference, or I would say the relation, or a situation, the contextualization of it, is that 9/11 gave impetus for a global reshaping or rethinking of the border space, a global reshaping of the migrant, a global thinking of who should we let in, who should we keep out. Now, what happened, why am I saying this, Prof? The World Trade Center bombings, yes, they happened, and they gave impetus, or they further gave thought about managing migration. But the 9/11 gave even further impetus based on the Iraqi invasion to say we are going there to address the people who bombed or flew aeroplanes into the World Trade Center. So it gave a much more broader, wild word out as to say, are migrants dangerous? Because if we said the bombings in 1995 and 1996 gave impetus to a global rethink of migration, I'd say, no, Prof, I was wrong. This thing started actually when the World Trade Center were bombed. But the whole thought around migrations gained traction, not only because of 9/11, but of the subsequent events that happened after, which were the invasion of Iraq, based on whatever they said, nuclear bombs, whatever they said were there. So that situation not only changed migration in the US, but it gave thought to migration worldwide to say, especially when I say worldwide, Prof, I don't want to talk about Africa. I believe there are no borders in Africa. I don't believe there are borders here. But it gave impetus to Western countries and parts of NATO countries to say, let's just tighten our border space. Now, unfortunately, the divide between the global North and the global South means policies made in the North somewhere, somehow will trickle down to the global South. So that whole notion, if I situate it, not to say the trade bombings in 1994 and 1995 did not give impetus to migration, but the subsequent 9/11 and the spread of the invasion to Iraq further gave impetus to many countries in the West to say, oh, so the border space can really threaten our territorial sovereignty. And that is why today you have so many Eurosceptic parties, populism, and whenever, even in South Africa, I think you are aware, Prof, we're going to elections next year, we're going to start hearing about migrants this, migrants that. So it's only the whole issue around migrants as a dangerous person, for me, started in 2001, subsequent invasion of Iraq.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that response. There's two requests for the floor. Let's take Paola, and then we end, because we only have about 5 minutes to end with Dr. Conde. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Now, what I wanted to add to the very interesting debate is the fact that we really need to get the facts right. So yes, 9/11 is being instrumentalized in the migration debate, but has nothing to do with migration. It's about international terrorism. And migration has nothing to do with insecurity, because 3/4 of the majority of the migrants, and the facts and evidence show us, don't pose a security threat. So it's fundamental to really focus on what is important. The majority of migrants, first of all, there are not many. There's not this invasion. The majority are regular. For certain people, the poorest, migrating regularly, it's not an option. It doesn't happen. So that's why the smugglers are facilitating. Yes, there's definitely racism, xenophobia, including Islamophobia, in the choice of who enters under which condition, who stays under which condition, which shouldn't be the case, considering that if we really look at pure economics, not only human rights, we have all to gain to have racially diverse people in board of enterprises. We know they produce more because they serve a diverse clientele, they are more innovative, and so on and so forth. So like this exclusion is costly from all perspectives, for the migrants, yes, but for the states too. So I really think we need to reshape the migration dialogue and reshape the migration narrative, because at the moment is based on stereotypes. Libya is not a transit country. Libya is mostly a destination country. And in fact, when the oil was discovered, Gaddafi asked to the arms and the brains of Africa to come, and then used migration when he wanted to negotiate the embargo, all of a sudden asking people to register to get residence permit that were not required. So transforming one night thousands of people into irregular migrants. So we really need, and that's the same for Tunisia. People went to Tunisia until very recently to stay in Tunisia. They didn't want to cross. So, and the irregular migration from Tunisia is a very recent phenomenon because Tunisia didn't need visas for Europe until very recently. So I really think we need to stop this, like it's important to reflect that the security approach is negative. But instead of focusing on this, we really need to focus on solution, and we need the academic to do that and to shape the narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo. And we have 3 minutes on the faculty. You can ask a question or make a comment, and then perhaps I'll hand over to you already to round up this conversation. Yeah.
That's a really tall order. I just, wanted to, underscore something that I've not really heard in this conversation, and that's the question of climate change, right? And the refugees that are being produced by the devastation that is being, wreaked across the continent, right, by climate change. So we've heard the story about security and security, the 9/11 story, but, what will happen when, suddenly, right, refugees that are seeking to move, right, both within the continent and beyond, but are being contained by these policies, what will happen when these numbers certainly increase, right, by the devastation of climate change? And I say that because I want to underscore, right, this dynamic between, the undesirable migrants who are being contained, right, who are the targets of these containment policies, undesirable migrants, because at the same time as we're seeing these, harsh containment policies being put in place, these agreements, we are also seeing, right, so to think more globally, right, beyond the EU, beyond the East, we're seeing policies being rolled out by countries in the global north, right, that encourage the best trained, right, in Africa to travel, overseas. And so that dynamic, right, would surely, continue to drive policies that contain, right, the most needy, especially those, and I'm particularly concerned here by, the question of climate change, while at the same time, right, facilitating the exit, right, of, again, the best trained, right, within the continent. I'm going to end it there. I really wish that we could go on and on, but I just would like to thank you all for what has been a fascinating discussion.
I hope extend the session for another hour.
Okay.
Just joking.
I wish Estelle would let us do that, but there are rules. There are rules surrounding these things, but thank you all so much to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much to Professor Kafo. There was no one was in better position to do this than he, and I really do thank him for being a wonderful scholar, an incredibly generous support of the Africa Interest Group, and of course, a fervent supporter of the ACO in general, and a mentor, an incredibly generous mentor to so many of us, so many scholars. Thank you all, and I'm looking forward to the next AIG event.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.